All right. This is a random live stream. Um, I don't have any specific topic, just if there's people who come in and want to talk and ask questions, they can. So, and hello, we have our first person here, London and Pam Wright from Arizona. Good to see y'all. Emily, not much. I have had a very busy day. Hello, Ken, Christian. Um, I had to wake up this morning early, and I had to drive like an hour and a half from my house and do multiple autopsies. Then I had to come home, and I had to sit and wait for the local prosecutor's office to call me for a trial that I am testifying in. Chloe and Maggie's here. That's good. Yeah, I had a trial today as well. So basically, I had autopsies and then I had a trial, and that takes a lot of preparation. Hello, Melissa. Um, I prepare a lot for my trials. Some other people just sort of bring their autopsy report and just wing it. But I prepare a lot because I like for it to go smoothly. And so I am very tired, actually, because, doing all the autopsies and then doing all that driving and then going and testifying. And I testified for at least an hour and a half, which is probably one of the longest testimonies I've ever done. Usually we can get testimony done in under an hour for just about any kind of case. Do I rehearse for testimony? No, I don't. At this point, I've done it so many times that I don't need to rehearse for it. Basically, what I do is I read over the autopsy report and I look at all the photos from the autopsy, and then I memorize, anything that I need to know. Like, for instance, if a gunshot wound of the right upper chest, it passes through the right upper lobe of the lung, the aortic arch, and the left upper lobe, and then exits at the, third posterior left intercostal space or something. So I need to know all that stuff. And then also I will, like I said, I review the photos to make sure they make sense. But also what I do is I review my autopsy reports for any possible errors or any possible ways that a defense attorney can attack that work that I've done. And so I usually am prepared for anything. Sometimes it's simple stuff like typographical errors that that if they pick it up, they might ask about it. So that is, but I usually prepare, and it's not much of a big deal. Hardly ever, I can't think of any time that an attorney has actually caught me on something that I wasn't already aware of. So Chloe says, how long before court do you have to prepare? So that's a good question, and it depends. Usually, if you have a trial on date X, the pre-trial preparatory conference will occur like 2 months before that. So that means you meet with the lawyers. You might even take a deposition or something, and you go over all the photos, you pick the photos out, you go over the autopsy report, and then, you wait for the trial to come. Usually the day before the trial, I will review my autopsy report and photos for something like an hour. I will read the whole thing. I'll make sure that there aren't any weird errors or anything like that. And so all in all, you have that kind of preparation. And then what I do is a little bit like when you're studying in medical school or college, for the most pertinent stuff, I'll actually make a little note card and I'll write that I can just put in my suit jacket. And then that way, when I'm waiting outside court, I can pull out that little note card and review, where the gunshot wounds were or whatever, stuff like that. So then London says, are you allowed to look at the report during trial if you forget something? So it depends on the judge. I've had judges that will not allow you to look at your own autopsy report. So they expect you to have the whole thing memorized. But if you need to look at it, some people don't care. But if you need to look at it, you can actually make a statement. And you can say, it would be helpful for me to refresh my memory if I can review the autopsy report. And usually the autopsy report is already submitted into evidence. So then what they do is they'll say, exhibit 43 autopsy report, and then they'll hand it to me. But for my own reports, I hardly ever have to have my actual autopsy report with me, because since I did the case, I remember most of the stuff. I don't usually need it. The only times I've ever needed it is if there's a ton of wounds, like if there's 100 stab wounds or 50 gunshot wounds, then I usually like to have it with me just in case. Do lawyers ever badger me about stuff? No. The reason why they don't really try to badger me too much is when I have a homicide case, those are the ones that are most likely to go to trial. I obsessively work on those reports to where they are as close to perfect as you can imagine. So when the report is finally submitted, there are no errors. There's nothing they can attack in there usually. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that I messed up that people went after. They could badger me if they want, and sometimes they'll try to create doubt by saying, like maybe they'll ask me a toxicology question or something, and then they might say, but you're not a toxicologist, so you shouldn't be answering that question, or something weird like that. And forensic toxicology is part of forensic pathology, but it is its own field. Like if there's something really deeply important that we have to talk about from a toxicologic perspective, I always defer to the trained forensic toxicologist. Salary range for a medical examiner is, it's all over the place. You can work as little as you want. If you wanted to work 2 days a month, or if you want to work 30 days a month, that's up to you. And so in one scenario, you're going to make, a few $1,000s, $50,000 or something. And then the other scenario, you're going to make 800,000. So it just depends how much you want to work. It doesn't, there's no set standard. It's all over the place. Plus, medical examiners make money not only from physically doing autopsies, but also from legal consults. So, if I wanted to quit today and just do legal consults, I could do that and make plenty of money. Nursing charting. Exactly. You have to be as precise as possible. So I usually like to have everything perfect. And I also draw diagrams so that, my diagrams can match the report perfectly, or maybe they'll match the photos perfectly. So it's a lot of hard work, How did I do on my first trial? So I actually did pretty well in my first trial. I actually testified on a murder case, only a couple of months into my fellowship. So I wasn't even a trained forensic pathologist yet, because in my state, there is something called a speedy trial, or I forget what the term for it is. But the point is, let's say one person kills another one, they shoot him, whatever. They can request a speedy trial, which means instead of this long, protracted process of hearings and depositions and all that stuff, you can basically go to trial like a month after the case ends, or after the autopsy is signed out. So I think I signed out a case in July. That was a murder. And I was testifying on it in September, and I had only been in fellowship like 3 months. So how did I do on it? I did good because I have always been able to communicate basic principles of medicine pretty easily. And so when you have a jury, see, I'm not really talking to the lawyers. I mean, I am. I'm answering their questions, but the people you're talking to in a trial is the jury, and the jury, the highest science class they may have had is eighth grade, and that's actually true. I mean, there are some people who don't take any science when they're in high school, and they can be jurors. So you have to teach medicine at an eighth grade level, basically. And so I did fine. I wasn't rattled. I was very prepared because I always over prepare for stuff. So yeah, it was easy. And then ever since then, it's been fine. When I'm on the stand, do they also put the photos of the decedent and make you work from those? Yeah, they do. They do. So every autopsy, like a murder case, every murder case, they will take photos, of course, during the autopsy. Then when you go to trial, they will put those photos up on usually a big, digital screen or something. And then I will discuss what I see in the photos. Usually I'll come down off the stand and I'll walk like in front of the screen and explain things. I had to do that today for like an hour. So, yeah, I mean, we do have to look at those. The thing is, the judge, it's dependent on the judge. Some judges will reject photos that are too gruesome, and other judges don't really have any standards on like a gruesomeness. Like, for instance, I've seen cases before where I've testified and they've shown like a brain that's got like blood, everywhere. That's pretty gruesome. Other of the same type of injuries, other judges will only show external stuff like, contusion of the head or something like that. And then continuing on here, can you estimate or guess the gun by bullet by the wound? So it's a major no-no in my field to actually try to estimate that, because sometimes 9mm handgun wounds, for instance, they can produce a very small wound. You would be surprised. And it's because the skin, depending on where you're shot on the body, the skin can be very stretchy. And so the bullet can go in and it forms actually a very small wound. But in other areas, that same 9mm gun with the same bullet can produce a huge wound. The classic example is like a gunshot wound to the temple, because right under this skin, literally, the thickness of this thing right here, which is like a little wallet, the thickness of that subcutaneous tissue, there's a bone there. And so if the muzzle is close, what'll happen is it forms a bubble under the tissue. It rips the skin open, and it'll form a big wound, sometimes this big. So it's hard to guess. Now, having done, I can't even tell you how many gunshot wounds I've seen. I mean, if you total all the gunshot wounds I've seen, it's well over 1,000, but I can make a pretty good guess. I mean, I don't officially do it, like I don't put it in my report, but I can look at a wound and pretty much know almost all the time what kind of gun was used. Now, the only caveat there is it has to be an indeterminate range gunshot wound, and usually those I can guess pretty closely, whether it's a 40 or whether it's a 9mm or whether it's a 22, something like that. I wouldn't say I'm 100%, but I'm pretty good at it. Will I ever open my own office? No, probably not. The way that we do it in Indiana, it's more like the pathologist usually goes to the site sometime, a lot of the times. There are other offices that have standalone offices, but I just can't see myself doing it because then I have to buy a building or rent a building and buy a bunch of autopsy equipment and hire full-time staff and stuff like that. And I'm probably just not going to do that. Will I ever write another book? Yes, if I will write another book. I would like to not be so burdened with work, and I'll be able to do that. How many gunshot wounds is the most you've seen on a single body? So I had a case once where there was 100 gunshot wounds. There was exactly 100 gunshot wounds on a body. I don't think they were counting. It just randomly came out to be 100. In Akron, Ohio, they are about to have the Jalen Walker shooting by the police grand jury case begin versus Akron Police Department. Will they bring in the medical investigator, or will it be bias? I don't actually know very much about that particular case, but anybody who was part of the case will testify. So EMS will probably testify. The medical legal death investigator will probably testify. The coroner or medical examiner, whoever did the case, will testify. The police will testify. So pretty much anybody that touches those cases where there's like police custody, they will testify. Now, as far as bias goes, I mean, you can always allege bias. Some people will allege bias because I work for the state. I am a state's witness usually, so they say that I'm biased for the state. Sometimes people will say that, but I'm an independent contractor. Personally, I am. I don't actually work. I'm not employed by anybody except myself. I own my own business. So I'm as I guess unbiased as you can get. But as far as somebody who is an employee of a particular county, I would imagine that bias will be alleged. I think that's probably just part of the defense strategy there. But whether or not actual bias exists is it's unknown, because people, most doctors I know, most forensic pathologists I know, they don't care who's in the room. They're gonna do the case properly. I know that I can't be influenced. I've had police before suggest that I call something a different way, and I simply tell them, sorry, I'm going to call it the way that I am trained to do it. But maybe some people are more subjected to that. I can't really say. Shot 47 times in the back. Yeah, that is problematic. That's a little bit of overkill. I don't know much about that case, but I will look that case up, and maybe I'll even comment on it either here or at some of my other social media sites. I usually talk about cases in the news at TikTok. If I was smart, I would actually just do that here, because I think it's way better to do it here. For TikTok, it's fine, but most of the people flipping through my videos are probably like ninth graders, and they're probably wondering why I'm on their FYP. But yeah, I think that I just need a little more time to make videos and edit them to look nice, which is why lately I tend to do lives, because it's the easiest thing for me to do, that I can actually still communicate and talk to you guys. But when I think about filming a video and editing it, it's a lot of work. So I'm going to need a little more time. Am I given the decedent's info prior to conducting an autopsy or after? Reference to bias. Depends what you mean by info. Of course, I'm always given, well, this is a 45-year-old male that was found dead at home, and he has a medical history of COPD, and he also is an alcoholic, and he was found in this position, and here are the scene photos. That's the kind of information I get beforehand. If somebody says, I believe this person was shot, then I don't care what they say, because ultimately what I say is what matters. And I've had people come in and tell me things like that, and it doesn't influence me. I'll tell you what I don't like, though. I don't like to look at videos of whatever crime or death has happened before I do the case. That actually has the potential for bias. I look at them sometimes. Well, I don't like to look at them at all, really, but sometimes I have to watch them. But I like to do my case and then look at my findings and then look at those things afterward and see if my case findings match what reality is. Because sometimes, unfortunately, these things are caught on tape. Murders, suicides in particular. One of the things that I've noticed a lot lately are suicides that are occurring in public. And so there's, cameras are everywhere now. It's not like in the 1980s where you never saw a camera. Now cameras are everywhere. So if somebody commits suicide in public, usually there's a video of it, and usually someone tries to make me watch it. Since your job involves law and litigation, how much justice studies do you have to take in school for your job? Zero. I don't take any. Everything that you learn about testifying is learned on the job. My first murder trial was 2 months after I started fellowship, and they basically just said, the person who was training me said, good luck, kind of like trial by fire, and here's your autopsy report, and memorize your autopsy report or make sure you're comfortable with it. So there's no training. Should there be training? Yeah, there probably should be. But the problem is, to become a really good forensic pathologist, you have to be very good at autopsy, and you have to be very good, particularly at homicide. So the only way to do that is to do tons of autopsies. And the more time you spend doing other stuff like legal training, the less time you have for autopsies. But ultimately, you have to be good at autopsies. Being good in trial comes with practice. I mean, I've probably done 150 murder trials, and I am good at it now. But it's because, just like anybody who does anything, I mean, if you shoot basketball for 2 months in a row, you're going to get better at it, and anything you practice, you're going to get good at. Do I have QA or consensus meeting with colleagues? I don't, because I don't have any colleagues. I work by myself. If there is something that is really borderline, that I really just cannot get the diagnosis on, then I have people that I can call and have them maybe send them photos or send them slides to look at or whatever. But I mean, the last time I had to consult with somebody else on a case was probably maybe August 2020. So it's been almost 3 years where I've had even one case that I felt I needed to consult. That's not to say that it won't happen. I think it's a good thing. I think it would be great. I would love to have somebody who would work with me and talk about cases with me. But like I said, I've tried to hire people. I've tried to get people here, but nobody wants to come to Indiana for some reason. I guess it's not exciting enough for people. But yeah, if I could, I would love to have somebody to work with. But at this point, I've become such an independent worker, or such an independent person. I don't know how I would fare with it. What else we got here? But QA is, let's see, do you ever have to refer off to federal medical examiners for investigation of a body? No, because ultimately, or at least all the cases I've done, even if it's a federal trial, so like a death penalty trial, or it's a federal drug case or something like that, the jurisdiction, the pathologist of jurisdiction still does the case. But no, I've never had to say, oh, I can't touch this, you have to do it. No, I've done federal cases, and it's just, and they're even sometimes in little, small, low population counties, but sometimes those come up, federal drug cases, capital murder cases, stuff like that, and I do those cases. But most of mine is just state cases, county cases. Which area in Indiana is short-staffed? All areas of Indiana are short-staffed. I mean, there's over 8 million residents here, and there's probably 7 forensic pathologists. Maybe there might be 8. So all of them, everywhere is understaffed. Probably even Marion County, which has, probably I'd say the biggest office, I think they would consider themselves needing more staff, although I haven't really talked to anybody from there in a long time. Could you work on side of another forensic pathologist, or would you prefer an assistant? I don't think 2 forensic pathologists should ever work on the same case unless it is a big media case. Like you can imagine in 1963 when JFK was shot, it would be unusual, I think, to have just one person on that case. I prefer for it to be myself and an assistant who it doesn't necessarily need forensic training, but an assistant. Me plus assistant. I don't really want another forensic pathologist on my case. Like I said, some forensic pathologists, especially if they're early in their career, they're a little scared to sign cases out, particularly murder cases. But I've done so many at this point that I don't waffle too much on signing a case out. It's, what I always say, and some people don't agree with me, people in this field, and what I say is, and this is as trite as it gets, it is what it is. Meaning, whatever you see, you interpret it, and based on those observations, you make a diagnosis. Sometimes the diagnosis is, I don't know. We call that undetermined. And I just think it's okay to call something undetermined if you're not sure. But the key is, or at least if I were teaching somebody, I would say, fine, you can call stuff undetermined, but you've got to explain why it's undetermined. So I always put a comment at the end of my report. Sometimes it's a long comment, and I explain why something is undetermined, because not everything is black and white. What else we got here? Anything else? I know I didn't really plan. I need to schedule these, but the problem is I never know what my schedule is going to be. What other questions do we have tonight? My cat. Where's my cat? That's funny. If he was right here, he would be drooling everywhere. That cat drools like a dog pants, and it drools. That's my cat. He's not close to here. He's way over on the other side, not nearby. I only have the cat in my lives if I do a live outside, because he likes to come outside and sit with me. So, do I see an increase in young folks with bowel cancer? So I will say this. I am not doing surgical pathology right now. I am a forensic pathologist. So do I ever see people, young people with bowel cancers that are undiagnosed? I mean, I do autopsy a fair amount of young people. And by young, I basically mean like 40 and under. All of my cases today were 20s and 30s. I have not personally picked up a bowel cancer in somebody who didn't already know they had it. Now, back when I was doing surgical pathology, which would be from 2008 to 2018, I did see a number of cases that were concerning. The youngest cancer I had was a rectal cancer in a girl who was 19. So yeah, there are young people. I'd see a few in the 20s, a few in the 30s. So, at autopsy, no, but I think the surgical pathologists are seeing it a lot more. It's really unfortunate. We don't know what's causing it. We probably, they've moved the screening. The screening used to be 50. And then they moved it to 45 now, and some people are even saying move it to 40. So, it's one of those cancers that if you can catch it early, you can actually cure it. You can remove the cancerous polyp or whatever, and you don't even really have to think about it anymore. And Chloe says, I need to start writing down questions because every time that I go live, you go blank. Yeah, obviously I have that effect on people. But yeah, just, I would say write some questions down that you're interested in, and next time you'll have them ready. Put them in your phone, or maybe have a little notebook, and you can ask away. You can ask anything, and I'll answer it if I can. So Emily says she had a friend die of colon cancer at 38. We had a guy that we grew up with in my small town. in southern Indiana. And a healthy guy, he's a professional, and he ended up getting colon cancer in his early 40s. I think he was probably around 42 or 43. And I think he passed away at 44. And that was just a few years ago. And that's just been really sad. You want to write some about the Tate killings. The Tate killings. Are you talking about, what are you talking about? Questions. Yeah, you can write questions down. Like I said, if you want to write questions ahead of time, I can try to answer them in the live. Oh yeah, Sharon Tate. Yeah, I mean, obviously I haven't studied that case, but I know what you're talking about. Some cases go outside of Indiana, such as Dayton or Kalamazoo. I think they also go to Cincinnati in the southeast part of the state. And then in the southern part of the state, I think some of those go to Louisville. Some of the border institutions send them off. I don't know that's a good question if they need an Indiana license. I don't believe they do. Because, these things have just been set up that way, but I'm not really sure. I've never had that come up. I think South Bend sends their cases to Kalamazoo, and I think maybe Elkhart County. But I don't know if they need the Indiana license or not. I mean, it's really easy to get an Indiana license if you're a physician. I don't think there's any trouble with that. But yeah, there's not enough forensics in our state, which is why they send them out. I mean, I personally think places like South Bend should just hire a pathologist. And I just think it's ridiculous that they send their cases 2 hours away. What a pain that must be for their police, crime techs and stuff like that. Get the money together, get the city to approve it, hire a pathologist, set up in a morgue in town there, and just do it. So I don't know why they have to do that. Now, Dayton's a little bit different because the counties to the west of Dayton and over in Indiana, they are rural counties which don't really have a central area to send things to. Let's see. What's the verdict? Was March busier compared to last year? March was, I didn't go look at March of last year, but I think it was the busiest month I've had. This March was. I want to hear a story of a case that shocked you with the outcome. There's been a few. I'll tell you the ones that really shock me, and believe it or not, choking cases are probably the most shocking because very often we don't know that they choked. So I have good examples of this. Unfortunately, they involve children, so I don't talk about them very much. I usually don't talk about children cases because people get too triggered, but I'll tell you one with an adult. So we had a case where I went to go do an autopsy, and it was a 40-something-year-old man who was a known alcoholic, and he died in his house. I think there may have been some drug use or something, but it came in as prospective drug OD. So, okay, we think this guy died of a drug OD. So I do the case, and basically the order that you do the case, most pathologists, is you open up the chest and you look in the chest and the abdomen and the pelvis. Then usually you'll move to the head and you'll open up the head and take the brain out. And the very last thing you do is the neck. So I did this case with this guy, and I didn't really appreciate much. They didn't look to be signs of drug use. I didn't see injection sites. There wasn't drug paraphernalia at the scene. I really didn't appreciate much. That usually when alcohol is in the stomach, you can smell it. It's got a very characteristic smell to it. And moreover, natural disease. So you didn't see COPD, you didn't see atherosclerosis of the heart or hypertension or brain hemorrhage. So we went through chest, abdomen, pelvis, and head, didn't find anything. And so I was like, well, okay, we're going to go ahead and do the neck now. So as I'm doing the neck, and you have to basically kind of like push the thyroid to the side and the larynx to the side, and then you dissect on each side because you don't want to cut the carotid arteries. So you basically cut on each side, and you get the larynx free. And so as what you do is then usually the trachea is open, and you'll put a clamp on the trachea, and well, this is how I do it. Not everybody does it like I do. Lift the clamp, and you kind of go and you dissect underneath the trachea and the back of the larynx, and then you have the spinal column of the neck there. And so as I'm dissecting this thing out, and I actually pull the larynx out, there's a very large chunk of steak that falls down onto the cervical spine there. And this chunk of steak was, how big was it? Let's just, literally, I'm just going to pick up this thing. This is like a case to a knife. It was pretty close to this size, that was in his throat. And so we absolutely could not believe it because, believe it or not, there are some pathologists who have a history of not taking the neck out. So that would have been a case that would have been missed. And so we saw this giant chunk of steak, very clearly it was steak. So I called the deputy coroner in that was on that case, and I said, hey, could you show me the scene photos, or did you see anything at the scene that was indicating that he was eating? Well, they show me the scene photos. This guy is on the couch, and of course his head is back, he's dead. And on the table next to the couch, there is a bowl with a spoon or a fork or something in it. And so I had them check what that was, and it turns out this dude was eating out of a bowl. He was eating pieces of steak, huge chunks of steak, and basically he was just eating too fast, got it lodged in there, and he died right there on his couch. And so that's a case where if you don't do an autopsy, you'll never really know what happened. You'll have, somebody say, oh, it's heart disease. Or you'll say, oh, this guy's an alcoholic, this is alcoholism. And so, this is why we do autopsies. And so cases like that are amazing. And they're, believe it or not, a little more common than you would think. I mean, I probably have 2 or 3 a year that are like that with choking. Lately, in the last couple of years, I've seen more kids, more children who unfortunately are found, and people think that it's like a SIDS type case, which is not a term we really use anymore, but you know what I mean. A child that's found dead in the bed, and then you do the autopsy, and then sometimes you'll find like a battery. I think they had a battery last year in the throat, I think it was a AAA battery. And so I find, unfortunately, kid cases with choking. And I've mentioned this before. I've mentioned this before because in a live, I don't know if you were watching it once, I was doing a live and I mentioned this stuff. And somebody in the live said that they didn't believe that children choked, that it was fake, that I was making it up. I just think that that's crazy that there are people out there who think that kids are not subject to that. What food is most commonly choked on? I would say, steak that's not chewed up very well is number one. But then I also see hot dogs or meats like that. Those would be number two. Let me scroll back here. Are you seeing an uptick in suicides this month? Thought I read that April is the highest amount. So I had the great fortune of being off for the entire first part of the month, so I can't really say. I had 3 cases today, and to my knowledge, none of those were suicides, and the one I had yesterday was a homicide. Do I hire a personal assistant for autopsy? So yeah, I have an autopsy assistant on every case. I sometimes, probably 70% of my baby cases, fetus and baby cases, I don't use an assistant. I just do it myself. But for adult autopsy, I do. What causes a pontomedullary rent? I actually don't know. Um, so that would be the area of the pons and the medulla and the brainstem. A rent is, that's funny that you say rent because that is not a common word that people understand for anatomy. And just today in my trial, I have literally never talked about the word rent used in that fashion. And in my trial today, I had to talk about that because there was it was basically well, it was a rent in the skull where there was an injury, so it kind of chipped the bone a little bit. And I explained to the jury what a rent was. So, but in your case, pontomedullary rent, I'm not really sure. Could be congenital or something like that. So tissue processing, and you don't have to do that on every case, you know. I mean, tissue processing in children always, and in adults where the diagnosis is uncertain. That's the only time I do tissue processing. So I sent it to a local, semi-local, it's actually across the state, but we send that to the hospital that I used to work at that has a nice histo lab there, and they do my histo slides for me there. So yeah, that's how I do it, is I just send them out, but I only send a few cases a month. Have I noticed any recent trends in death? I mean, there's tons and tons of drug overdoses containing fentanyl, but that's not all that different from last year or the year before. Otherwise, it's the usual stuff that you would expect, heart and lung, stuff like that. What education is required for assistant? Daughter is in second year of college and wants to figure out what she wants to do. There is no educational requirement. I mean, like my assistants do not have any formal training in pathology. My one assistant that works with me the most, I mean, I trained her on the job. She's got some medical background, but it's not formal education. So usually people get into those jobs. You know, you can get a PA degree, a pathology assistant degree. Those are 2 years after college. But you don't necessarily need that. All right, what else we got here? We'll do a couple more minutes. If you've got any other questions. Yeah, your mom had a pontine hemorrhage. So did your mom have high blood pressure? Because pontine or pontine hemorrhages, usually they're called juror hemorrhages, are almost always caused by hypertension. So uncontrolled high blood pressure resulting in pontine hemorrhage, which is very often fatal. Have I ever had a case in which a judge or family requests me to stop midway? I have not, because when we do an autopsy, the family is aware that there is an autopsy done. Before the autopsy, they sometimes don't want it, and they'll be very angry about it, but it's not my decision. I would just rather not do an autopsy if I can, because I'm already overworked. But if the coroner makes the legal decision that an autopsy is made, the family is aware and they don't try to stop it per se. But as far as judge goes, no, I've had some police before who believed that something else needed to be checked on an autopsy. I had a case once where a police officer thought that he suddenly became a forensic expert, and he called and they had the body brought back because they said that I missed something, and he was wrong, and it really almost screwed up a murder case. And in fact, we had a special prosecutor on that case, and the special prosecutor told me that cop just about cost the entire case and just about resulted in a murderer walking free, because he got big ideas that he knew something that I didn't. And so fortunately, he's humbled, and I never work with that guy again or that county. In fact, I quit working for that county at that point. Their police department and their coroner was as dumb as a box of rocks. And I wish them success, but unfortunately they just don't have any good direction. That was a few years ago. But that's what happens when you try to butt in on a case that you don't really know what you're talking about. And I'm not talking about anybody here, but it doesn't matter if we're talking about forensics or some other field. If you don't know what you're talking about, you let the expert take the fall. Because if I screwed something up, then I will get grilled for it during trial. And it is my fault if I screw something up. If a cop butts in and tries to change the case, that's going to mess up everything for the police, for me, and for the coroner, and cause murderers to walk free. So yeah, I have real issues with that sort of thing. Have I ever had a rabies case? No, we've never had one. They're very uncommon. So have I ever had a juror pass out? So that's pretty interesting. I have not had a juror pass out, but I have had jurors become so uncomfortable that when we show the photos, they'll just look at the ground or they'll look away because they just can't handle it. The one that I had though once is I had a defendant. I had a defendant pass out in the courtroom. And this case was one on which the defendant had unintentionally resulted in the death of some children. And I'm not going to talk about the specifics of that. It's just too specific. I'm not going to get into it. But she was on trial, and we started to bring up the pathology photos, which, by the way, weren't gruesome. They were just kind of like external photos to show like some injuries. And yeah, she was out. She went out. So I've never had that happen before or since. Have I ever had tetanus case? No, I mean, again, tetanus is very uncommon in the United States, just like rabies is uncommon. If either of these diseases are suspected, they are treated rapidly with immunoglobulin, and most people are vaccinated against tetanus with the DPT shot. In the future, because there are a lot of people who are deciding not to get vaccinated for any vaccines, we will start to see tetanus, and tetanus is probably the most suffering that you can have in a disease. It's one of the most extraordinarily painful diseases that you can possibly have. And there will be people suffer. Children and adults will suffer because people don't want to get a DPT vaccine. It's one thing to not want a vaccine for something else, but to not get a DPT you're just asking for trouble, because pertussis, diphtheria, tetanus are all diseases that are easily stopped with the vaccine. Do I become a juror on the state laws? So I can become a juror. I have gotten a letter before for jury duty, but not selected. I could be a juror. They might actually, because of my knowledge, because of my background, it's pretty likely that they would not select me as a juror. Increase in syphilis in Ohio and probably the U.S. Why do you suppose that is? So the one thing about infectious diseases is you cannot keep them at bay forever. They always come back. And that's because people often forget the reasons how we got here, whether it's treatment or whether it's vaccination and stuff like that. And also just habits. Syphilis, if you said to me in the 1990s something about syphilis, I would have just laughed. Syphilis doesn't exist, don't have to worry about it anymore. But there has been an uptick in syphilis in our area as well. In fact, and this is what is so surprising, not just primary syphilis, but tertiary syphilis. We're talking like we're late 1700s, early 1800s, Napoleon era type stuff with tertiary syphilis. People should not be getting tertiary syphilis because it's easily treated with benzathine penicillin if you catch it right off. So I think that probably seeing an increase because we're seeing a lot less education. You know, everybody, half the people online don't believe anything that they hear. Some things like, you know, these diseases are dangerous or that you can catch these diseases. And so they just don't believe it. And then they go out and they get said disease. And then they're ashamed because they know they made a mistake. And then they don't go to the doctor. And then they end up with tertiary syphilis. So, I mean, I think it's an educational issue because, you know, nobody should ever get past primary syphilis, in my opinion. Okay. Yeah, it's been popping up. I mean, ever since I sort of was finishing residency, we saw a little bit of it. But recently, I won't say it's exploded, but it's definitely jumped up. We've also seen not just we've seen syphilis, but other diseases. Tuberculosis is making a little bit of a comeback. I don't know if you saw in the news. I haven't covered it on my TikTok channel, but there's a lady that's tuberculosis positive, and she refuses to take the medication and she refuses to isolate. And so, you know, I'm sure it's one of these rah-rah Freedom America people who don't believe that it's their responsibility not to hurt other people. Tuberculosis is a very bad disease. You absolutely do not want anything to do with tuberculosis. And so this lady is walking around spreading tuberculosis, presumably. So you have to be careful when you hear somebody coughing. It's not just allergies or maybe something like flu or COVID. Now so we could actually have tuberculosis popping up. So what kind of shirt is this? Check it out. Firebird. That's right. Community health requires community participation. Yeah, that's a good point. I really agree with that as well. What I always say is, as far as rights go, you can have a lot of rights, but you don't have the right to go infect other people. Just like you don't have the right to go harm other people, whether it be with a weapon or something else. There is no right that you have to harm other people. So these people that don't understand infectious diseases, they don't understand the severity of it. And again, it comes back to an educational issue. I mean, in high school, even I knew in high school that tuberculosis was something that was kind of in our past, but I knew it was a serious and terrible thing. And now it's starting to come back up because of people like this lady. Who knows how many people she's infected already? Let's see here. I think we're probably getting pretty close to finishing up here. I've been on here a few minutes longer than I had anticipated. So, but it's been a good live, I think. Any other questions tonight? Yeah, first car. So I like this car. I also like 72 Camaro. That's probably one of my favorites, is like 70 to 72 Camaros. I like those old kind of cars, hot rod type thing, muscle car. Yeah, those someday I'll have one maybe. But if we don't have any other questions, I'll probably go ahead and sign off, and we'll do another one eventually, soon, maybe in a couple of days. But I appreciate you guys hanging out. You know, for an unannounced live and for one where I did not start at TikTok, we had, 25 people in here tonight. I think that's pretty good. And I'm sure many more people will watch this after I post it. So I'll talk to you guys next time. And I guess I'll tell you what, if you think of other topics you want me to talk about here on YouTube, when this live posts, you can just type a comment and say, I want to hear about this. I want to hear about that. And, I'll do a live on it. Because most of these are just kind of like ask me anything, but I could do topics as well. All right, then. I'll see you guys next time.